Backlash at last night's city council meeting in Mankato caused discussions to adjourn early. The crowd voicing concerns about security with proposed tech upgrades.
Aaron Stuvey has more with what got passed and what concerns organizers still have.
Council meeting is adjourned.
Monday's Mankato City Council meeting was adjourned early as public backlash stalled discussions on a series of technology upgrades to Mankato public safety that included additional surveillance cameras with AI capabilities. The changes have been discussed by the council for several months, and Monday was supposed to be a final passing of the resolution.
This makes you look really bad.
It's your job to listen to us, guys.
But an organized effort on social media filled the chamber with opposition, and the crowd got raucous before, during, and after the meeting. Critics of the proposal cited concerns over the costs and privacy risks of such systems.
We had spoken to a counselor who had said that he had not received anything in support of the proposal. So every person who has spoken about this publicly that I've been able to find or see at these meetings has done so in opposition.
The commotion around the meeting didn't mean that nothing got done, as 2/3 of the proposal managed to pass. A statement from City Manager Susan Arntz clarified that the 20 milestone cameras that the council agreed to purchase would not include facial recognition technology or access national databases, instead using AI features to identify vehicle colors, types, and license plates. The council also approved the activation of the Axon license plate reader system, which is already installed in squad cars. That system will receive data from the National Crime Information Center about stolen vehicles, felony warrants, and Amber Alerts. Where the proposal stalled was regarding the purchase of 12 flock cameras and a trailer-mounted camera for surveillance. The city will revisit the technology in 6 months, evaluating the implementation of the past technology. In Mankato, Aaron Stuvey, KUIC News Now.